Okay, excellent. So welcome to everyone from wherever in the world, literally. We have among our speakers experts from various continents, and also in our audience, we know that we have companies, organizations, institutions from literally all over. My name is Andrea Koniński-Bicazzi. I am the coordinator of PrivacyRules, which is a leading alliance of data privacy experts, and now present in 54 jurisdictions in the world, growing constantly, and this year in particular growing for what concerns cybersecurity companies in order to provide 24/7 expertise to anyone who's seeking for data privacy and cybersecurity support. There is a wonderful panel of speakers representing academia, representing international organizations, representing legal practitioners today with us. Each of them deserves probably 5 minutes just to present their expertise and their experience, but we want to be extremely fluid because the topic at stake is really important. With some of the speakers of today, we already spoke about how cybercrime increased as a result of the pandemic. Unfortunately, we are now here to assess how the increase in cybercrime evolved during the pandemic. So it's unfortunately is a dramatic assessment that this increase continues. Cybercrime is changing to some extent. So we are going to analyze these in order to disseminate as important information to all those in the audience on what to do in order to prevent these or to respond, and what we can expect next. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I will thank you again at the very end. So the word now goes to Ruben, who is the moderator of today's panel. And I also want to invite everyone in the audience to submit questions in the Q&A button at the very end of this page that will be taken over either during the presentations from our speakers, whether if the questions fit perfectly with what is discussed in the given moment, or in the 30 minutes debate at the very end. Once more, thanks everyone for being here. Ruben.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Hi, everyone, and it's my turn to welcome everyone to this very interesting webinar that we have today for you on cybercrime during this COVID pandemic. Now, my name is Ruben Roeks. I'm a lawyer at the Timelex law firm. We're based in Brussels, specialized in cybersecurity, data protection, IT law in general. And today I have the great honor of being the moderator of this panel of very distinguished speakers. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I hope all of you are. As I'm sure most of you know, we have seen, as Andrea already announced, a dramatic increase in cybercrime during this pandemic. We've seen it in our law firm as well. Many of our clients, be it very big international groups or small SMEs working only in Belgium, they all have been faced to more or less extent with new types of crime that they haven't encountered before, and always on their digital assets. So I think with the speakers that we have today, it will be very interesting to see how global these cybercrime trends really are, and what the implications are for organizations when they try to fight these emerging threats. Some of these threats are not even new, but they've definitely taken up speed because of that tendency that we see everywhere now of people starting to work from home, and where we even see big tech companies now announcing that they believe that this trend from that is working from home will persist in the future after the pandemic as well. So with that brief introduction from my end, I would very much like to give the word to our first speaker of today, which is Mr. Ben Waits from Europol, who will give us an oversight of the developments as they are happening at the European level. So Mr. Waits, perhaps I can give the floor to you.
Thank you, Ruben. Yeah, as you said, we only have a few minutes each because we have such a wide range of panelists, so I will try and be brief. Europol is collecting reporting from law enforcement agencies around Europe and also in partner countries elsewhere about the specific crime threats related to COVID, and we've been doing that since the beginning of the pandemic, and then delivering strategic reports about these trends, both to the law enforcement audience and also to the public. So anyone who wants to read more about this can find a report on our website that was published in November about this topic, which goes into a bit more depth than I'll have time for today. But the main trends that we've observed, I would sort of categorize as follows. Firstly, existing types of crime which have shifted to take advantage of public anxiety about COVID. So typically a lot of phishing campaigns focusing on aspects of the COVID situation. So in the initial phase of the pandemic and the lockdown, a lot around personal protective equipment, which was hard for people to get hold of. More recently, that's transferred more towards topics around vaccines and so on. And the main purpose of these phishing campaigns is to harvest people's personal data, credentials for online services, other sensitive data, financial data, which can then be used for more targeted kind of online attacks. As we know, there's a very vibrant online marketplace for the buying and selling of stolen personal credentials. So really, this is just an adaptation of an existing crime type to take advantage of public concerns about COVID, really. We also see a slight shift in the type of organizations that cyber criminals are targeting, not so much in these general phishing campaigns, but in more targeted cyber attacks. And that would be, we've noticed that healthcare organizations have been particularly targeted in the last year, more so than in the past, although we have to note that healthcare organizations were already targeted, notably in the WannaCry attack, which is one of the biggest sort of cyber crises there's ever been in 2017. Hospitals were typically some of the main victims then. So this is not necessarily something new, but we have seen an upsurge in it in the last 12 months. And of course, the other shift is simply the fact that people, individuals, companies are spending vastly more time online than they were in the past. There's been an acceleration of what was already an existing trend of shifting from offline to online activity. And a lot of companies, organizations, and also individuals who may have had quite a conservative approach to using cloud storage, to using teleconferencing, and so on, have basically been forced to take a leap into those services, particularly in the first phase of the pandemic. It was a kind of force majeure situation. And in some of those cases, they may not have properly anticipated or managed the risk. So this increased the vulnerability of those organizations, and it increased the attack surface for cybercrime attacks. This is something that we think has stabilized in the last few months. So this was more a feature of the initial phase of the pandemic, and gradually organizations and individuals have been getting a bit more savvy about what they need to be doing. And this is really a question of basic cyber hygiene. And we also recommend a focus on kind of prevention and awareness campaigns. This isn't just about investigating crime, but a lot of this is to do with people taking the necessary measures to protect themselves, to actually limit the vulnerabilities that criminals can exploit. In terms of the shift of the physical shift of people onto using online services, the closure of schools around the world has also had a big impact. And unfortunately, children around the world who were already in vulnerable domestic situations have, of course, found themselves even more vulnerable to abuse than they were in the past. And we've seen a big upsurge in a lot of jurisdictions of the reporting of sexual abuse of minors. And this is partly to do with the fact that people are using more online services. Possibly offenders are spending more time online as well, but it's definitely to do with children in situations where they can be abused actually being more vulnerable now than they were in the past. So I would probably leave it there because I know we're short of time, but just to summarize, I think it's not so much entirely new forms of criminality that we've seen as a result of COVID, but it's shifts in the trends, and it's tactical shifts from cyber criminals and offenders that have been driven by the big change in companies and citizens' routines and online habits during that time, which was, as I said, massively accelerated as a result of the crisis. I could go on, but I think I'll leave it there and give the other panelists a chance to intervene as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waits. I think that was a very good start of this webinar in terms of the different trends that we see at the level of Europol. I think there is a large chunk of time reserved at the end for different questions to our panelists. So I suggest that in the interest of time, we now move on to our next speaker, which is Mr. Ansieta Antivilo from the Chilean police.
Yep, as much as I know, I am from Chile. I live in Chile. This is summertime, so can enjoy the weather, you know, because we're still kind of within a curfew and, you know, moving in and out because of the pandemic situation. And actually, first of all, I would like to say thanks again to all of you for inviting us. And I fully agree with Europol. I fully agree with Ruben. Was it Ruben? No, it was Ben Waits. I fully agree with him. The assessment he made. Yep, it is exactly the same thing that we've been seeing here. When we talk about new threats, the question that we always have to ask to ourselves is it really new? Really? I mean, people trying to take other people's money using, you know, now technology, IT as a mean. Is it new in reality? Is it a new version, a new flavor of something that has been happening, you know, for quite a long time? So when we talk about what are the usages of IT, we see now involving not only high-end IT kind of criminality. I'm talking about, you know, sometimes what we call IP crime. When we talk about our children being under threat because of the increase of the usage of internet. So we have a bottom line over there, and something that it is common for all these kind of crimes. And it is on one side, the lack of knowledge from the parental side, the lack of knowledge from users, and in many aspects about IT. That's one problem. See, so on the other end, you know, we see children. They are very IT kind of based right now. Their thumbs, they move in another speed if compared with us older people. So there's a gap when something moves very fast and the other end moves very slow. You see a gap, and it is the gap that criminals, organized crime, try to break in. They try to use for their own benefit. So one of the problems that we have is how do we? I come from a school of economics, so sometimes I see my life, you know, as part of a chart in a way. So how do we, in a way, reduce the gap between, you know, IT people, let's say, and kids, you know, following IT very fast, and people that are not that much into? We have two ways, chart-wise. One is we can ask, you know, the bad guys to slow down a little bit, but that will not happen, right? But it could be considered, but it will not happen. So what we could do really is how do we, you know, speed up a little bit? To buy a car, anybody can buy it. Anybody can buy a computer. The problem is to use it, you have to get a driving license. But to use a computer, you know, we have people that have bought a computer and they use it without even knowing, you know, what their threats are. So the point is we need to reduce the gap right there because, you know, on this side of the fence, we have to be more organized than organized crime just to kind of minimize, you know, the impact of them over us. And that's something that we're still missing. It's not only about the laws. Laws is one thing because we have very old laws as a concept that don't apply sometimes, you know, at national level. We have law enforcement. I represent law enforcement, and we're all the time complaining that most of the time law enforcement is not part of the process or decision-making process just to get a new bill, a new law. The point is, a law, it will be good, better, worse, only if at the moment that we need to apply the law at operational level, it is useful and not useless. And that's something we need to work on. The gaps that we leave in between, you know, all these different steps and phases at national level, then it will be exploited by the bad guys. But at international level, it's even worse. It's not only about the idea of having an international law. It's, come on, let's make the exercise something that I call operational exercises, and let's see whether it works at operational level. If it doesn't work, there is always a gap to improve. There is always something that we need to make sure that it will work. Because if not, it becomes only paper that then when we try to make it work, it will not work. And people coming from IT environment, we all know that the worst scenario that we can work on is trying to work on production, we say, on real time, trying to work on something that we are just developing on that moment. It's the worst scenario that we can really, expect. And that's something that we learn, when we have new laws, that there is always a gap. So there is a kind of a delay between having a law, and then we will see months later that it didn't apply that way. So I think there is room for improvement, and at national level, I can see those gaps. But now that you guys are over there somewhere worldwide, we all agree, I think, that at international level, the scenario is even worse than a national level. So the problem is that we're dealing with something that affects everybody everywhere. So the challenge is huge. But nothing will happen if we don't have the attitude in general, just to give it a try in trying to implement and building trust. I think trust is the key element. In my part of the world, the public-private partnership concept is not that well developed, because in general, many countries, just working with private sector is not that well seen, by public servants. So we need to make sure that we'll work together, trying to make everything, everything working at the operational level. And I think that will give us a new trend and try to reduce or change the slope of the curve here, and just reducing the gap. That's actually, I think, something we can work on. And then sharing information. The laws nowadays, sometimes, we have only official means just to exchange laws. In Europe, you have Europol, so you have a legal foundation just to share information. But at international level, in general, what we're sharing is intelligence, and then we need to find a way how to put that into something that it will move or will make something happen. I think there are still many challenges, but the legal framework and international law is something that it needs to be updated.
Great, thank you for that very interesting take from the Chilean perspective. I would now give the floor to Mr. Gould, who will give us a law enforcement perspective from the UK. And then I think we have all these different views from the law enforcement field before we move on to a more academic perspective. Mr. Gould, if you would, please.
Ruben, thank you very much. And thank you very much to Privacy Rules for the opportunity to come and speak to you today. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Andrew Gould. I'm a Detective Chief Superintendent in the Metropolitan Police in London, New Scotland Yard, but I work full-time for the National Police Chiefs Council, which is the representative body for UK policing, and I run our National Cybercrime Programme. So that's a programme that looks to build the capacity and capability of policing to improve our response to cybercrime, and I'll talk in a moment about what we're doing in that space. But I would completely concur with what Ben and Jaime have said. That is very much a picture, both perspectives that I absolutely recognise. So in the UK, our cybercrime programme is very much focused on, for us, Computer Misuse Act offences, so hacking offences, unauthorised access, computers attacking computers in essence. We don't look more broadly at kind of cyber-enabled fraud and all of online crime, although we are heavily involved in there's a lot of crossover in those areas, quite obviously, but we've been very focused in the last 3 years building the local response to this, because what we've done in the UK, I think we've built a good capability that works very well at the national and regional level. So we have regional cybercrime units that work seamlessly and hand in glove with the National Crime Agency and the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of GCHQ, which is our intelligence agency in this space. And that kind of major incident response and the kind of UK government response in that space, and our capability we think is pretty good, whether it's tackling hostile states or organised crime groups. But what we've always lacked is an effective capability at the local level. So if you are a normal member of the public or a normal business or organisation, frankly, historically, you have had no service from the police, none whatsoever, because it hasn't been a priority. And I think that's still the case in most countries around the world. Where we've been lucky in the last 3 years is to get very significant government funding to build that local capability. So we now have cybercrime units in every force in England and Wales, working under the regional teams, working with the National Crime Agency, working with the National Cybersecurity Centre. So we think we've built, with the relationships we've got and the central control we've been given now, which is rare for policing, our forces are operationally and constitutionally independent. No one can dictate how they work. But in this area, all the chiefs have agreed to give up that authority and control, and they've handed that to us at the centre, because this is a national and international problem that requires a national or international response. So we've now built a system and a capability that works well, we think, in a reactive sense. We always need more resources. There are all the challenges of technology and jurisdiction that everybody's familiar with. But in terms of what we can control and influence, we're not in a bad place. And we think actually what we've built compared to the rest of the world is pretty world leading. But let's be really honest, in terms of law enforcement internationally, there isn't a huge amount of competition. There is there are some brilliant international units doing some outstanding work, but we don't see much local to national join up. So the volume crime victim, the average member of the public, gets very little service at all. That's something that we've addressed here, but there's still a significant gap for us. What we find is we've built a reactive capability we're reasonably pleased with, but it's not game changing. It's not having the impact that we need to be having. And that's because we're insufficiently data driven, we're insufficiently intelligence driven. The vast majority of victims never recognize that they've been victimized and don't have the confidence to report to police, because quite frankly, what's the point in many people's views? They don't know now that we're arresting hundreds of people in the UK for these offences, and we weren't a couple of years ago. But that public confidence and that gap between what's happening and what's reported is huge. And it's relying on people. It takes some time for those to come through. These crimes take a long time to investigate. We need to get on the front foot. So there's one particular project we're working on at the moment that's really critical to how we develop. So we want to get data from business. We want to get a clearer picture of lifetime real threats and attacks, so we can get a picture day to day of what's really going on, so we can decide where to put our resources most appropriately, whether that's investigations in the UK or abroad, or giving better, more relevant advice to business about how to protect themselves. That's what we're focused on. So we've created something that we call the Police Cyber Alarm, and we've got a public website promoting it. It's a bit of software that any organisation can download, sits on their external network, and passes suspicious activity and attack data to us. So effectively, we're crowdsourcing our kind of data picture. So as more and more organisations sign up, that will start to drive more and more of our activity. We've got government funding for it to be a free tool for small and medium-sized enterprises, and over time, as that grows, that will drive more and more of our advice to the public in terms of real. Every force in the country signed up to it. So if you're an officer in London or Birmingham or York or Manchester, you can drill into what's happening into your city in real time and turn that into valuable real-time messaging for your businesses. And we'll also be able to drive a lot of our operational activity, because although yes, cybercrime is global and international, it's also local, and that's what people often forget. There are plenty of UK-based cyber criminals who are very good at what they do and also not very good at what they do. And a lot of our kids that are playing around in this space, not understanding the damage that they do, they all need dealing with too, because actually there's a talent pipeline for the future. We don't want to criminalize those kids. Most of them don't even realize what they're doing is a crime. So let's get hold of them early and point them in a different direction. So there's an awful lot that we are doing, and I'm actually quite optimistic for the future. The more we collaborate and work with business, the better picture we get, the more trust we get, and the more we can start to drive down and have a real impact. But the key to that impact is obviously that global cooperation, which goes back to the trust piece that we've already talked about.
Thank you very much for that insight. Yeah, and we now have already discussed the international level. I'm very happy with the local perspective that you've offered from the UK police. I'm very aware of time. We have a very ambitious program today, so I must ask that we keep our eye on the clock. So I will quickly move on to our next speaker, Mr. Veli, who will give a more in-depth perspective on that international cooperation and the different mechanisms that exist.
Thanks, Ruben, and hello everyone. My name is Kemal Veli Açar. I worked at the Department of Cybercrime of the Turkish National Police as the manager of International Cooperation Unit for 3 years. And also I have some research outputs about the prevention, detection, and investigation of online child sexual abuse cases. Now, at the end of Europol's IOCTA 2020 report, there are some remarks on the need for stronger international cooperation and faster information sharing, particularly between the private sector and police agencies. Now, it's possible to see similar statements in every IOCTA report, since this has been a huge problem, even before COVID-19. And now with COVID-19, there are more cybercrime cases than ever. And the resources of law enforcement agencies, particularly the human resources, are diminished to a certain extent because of the COVID-19 measures. Now, before getting deeper on that subject, I'd like to summarize the possible international cooperation methods for law enforcement agencies. First of all, there are Interpol and Europol channels. They take time, but they are reliable and very secure. That's why they are the first and most popular option for law enforcement agencies to cooperate with other law enforcement agencies. And secondly, there are police liaison officers in most embassies, and through them, it's possible for police agencies to conduct face-to-face police cooperation with foreign colleagues. They can share information and even get involved with operational activities. And thirdly, law enforcement agencies could reach to some internet service providers and get information from them directly. This has been a good practice, has been around more than a decade, and especially the US tech companies are very good about this, such as Facebook and Google. But police cooperation is limited in its nature, and at some point there needs to be a judicial cooperation, because with police cooperation you can only get some kind of information like subscriber information. But for example, for content data and traffic data, you need a judicial cooperation, and that's where mutual legal assistance treaty requests, aka MLAT requests, come into play. Now, MLAT requests occur between the ministries of justice, and it takes a lot of time, sometimes for years. And obviously, it's not an effective way for cybercrime investigations. Being well aware of that fact, the Council of Europe has been working on a second additional protocol to the Budapest Convention. Now, among other things, this additional protocol brings two important improvements to the current system. First, electronic MLAT requests between Ministry of Justice for urgent cases. Now, it's a great invention, but more than 95% of cybercrime cases are not urgent. So for them, unfortunately, nothing's going to change, and the MLAT problem remains to stay. But still, it's an improvement. And secondly, direct requests from the ISPs, internet service providers of other member countries. As I said before, for the US tech companies, it's a very good practice, but it's not applicable for all the countries around the world. So it's the expansion of that good practice, and I find it quite interesting and good. But are these improvements going to solve all the problems faced by cybercrime investigators? Unfortunately not. I think the situation doesn't look promising for the future. However, at least the policymakers are well aware of the challenge faced by investigators, and they are trying to come up with appropriate solutions.
Thank you very much on that perspective from a more legal perspective on international collaboration between the law enforcement agencies and the industry. Now I would like to give the word to Professor de Busser, who I believe will give us some more insight in how organizations themselves can approach this problem. Professor de Busser, if you please.
Yes, thank you, Ruben, for giving me the floor, and thank you, Andrea, for organizing this and inviting me again to this webinar. It's always a pleasure to discuss these things with a good group of people and a good group of experts. So my name is Else Busser. I'm Assistant Professor of Cybersecurity Governance at Leiden University, based in The Hague in the Netherlands. And I will use my time here to offer some insights from the academic community and as you can see, single-handedly offer some gender balance to this panel. So as Ruben just said, I want to focus on organizations for a bit, because I can imagine that most of the people who are on the call now are part of some kind of organization, either small or big, and will wonder, and I also see that from the chat and the questions that keep coming in, wonder what can we do? And of course, this is not a silver bullet. I'm not going to tell you that I'm going to solve it for you, but I'm going to offer an idea on shifting thinking and bringing the debate maybe a little bit forward. And the way to do that, I think, is if we look at organizations, we see that they very often are too focused, I might say, on compliance, being compliant with the applicable rules and regulations, be it the GDPR, be it in this directive or Cybercrime Convention and the implementations thereof. Now, that is in itself, of course, not wrong, but it is a too limited view if compliance is seen as the goal in itself. In fact, what we should see as a goal is the wider security, because the confusion is often that compliance will give you security, and that is not the case. Compliance is not the same as security for two reasons. One, being compliant with law means you're being compliant with applicable rules and regulations that one of the previous speakers already touched upon, that cannot keep up with technology, cannot keep up with the progress, with the advancement of technology that criminals very happily try to use and abuse. And I'm speaking now with vulnerabilities in systems, of course. That's point one. And point two is being even perfectly compliant with applicable rules and regulations will not stop criminals from trying to look for these vulnerabilities in your systems and from vulnerabilities in people, and trying to prey on the anxiety and the stress that we're all feeling right now. It also does not stop. I know that this webinar is about cybercrime, but it also does not stop the human error and the accidents that may happen, the accidental data breaches that we often see. So compliance in itself cannot be a goal. I think we need to shift our thinking to the wider goal of security, and that I'm speaking of a security culture that should build within an organization. And how do you do that? That is by building up a sort of a commitment to security behavior, to a more secure behavior by people and also by systems. And systems are used by people. So you want your users, the members of your organization, to behave as secure as possible. You want to build a system that from the ground up is built in the most secure way and will have the most secure option as a default option. I saw one of the questions in the chat touching upon smart TVs, for example, and the default settings that they come with. Now we still need to secure funding for it, but we might in the next few months start a project on how to exactly do that. It's called Cybersecurity by Integrated Design, which means that from the very first point of drawing up a new software system, you start implementing cybersecurity. That is often not done because systems are built and cybersecurity becomes an afterthought. And that is what I think the thinking needs to shift. Instead of focusing on compliance and having cybersecurity as an afterthought, I think the focus should be on building a security culture, and then automatically compliance will become a byproduct of that. And in that sense, I think it is a slight shift in thinking, a slight shift in in focal point that actually can help reduce the risk and reduce the harm that these kind of behaviors can cause. I will stop here for now and look forward to discussing this further with you.
Thank you very much, Professor de Busse, for that very interesting insight where we have that idea of a security culture, of security integration by design. And with that in mind, I would like to move to the next speaker, Mr. Stranieri, who will continue with the industry perspective, if I may call it that, and give us some insights in how we should protect us online.
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you, Rules and Privacy, for this great invitation and the opportunity. Well, my name is Sebastian Stranieri. I'm the CEO and founder of BU Security, a company with focus in developing solutions for identity protection and fraud prevention. We started in Argentina, so we have a great footprint in Latin America. We are partners with Jaime and Juan Carlos, we are closer. And in the last year was incredible how identity was highlighted as one of the biggest issues in terms of cybersecurity. Just for a minute, try to think about your identity online. We are suffering the biggest fragmentation ever in terms of digital identity. And the only thing that this pandemic context creates more was the highlighting in how we need to protect our identity, and at the same time that companies provide digital services and new highways to get on board in new digital services in how to protect fraud in those type of schemas. So in our company, we help government institutions, healthcare and education in how to transform these platforms to become, well, online or digital, like this event. Since the beginning of the delivery of COVID relief in some countries like Argentina or Bolivia, in also Dominican Republic, you need to provide the ability to the government to identify between a synthetic identity and a real identity. And also we are facing the worst scenario in terms of attacks. The last year was in terms of between the real attacks and the fake ones, like FaceApp, where you are having a complete and massive biometric database created just by a funny app. So it's a great challenge. It's one of the biggest challenges. Well, we have last week a 200 million users database leaked from Brazil. So how companies and government prepare to begin digital in that context? So what I think is that, well, first of all, the purpose to protect people, to protect the going to a branch or trying to avoid the elderly to go to take a pension or the retirement, doing long lines in banks are a priority in this stage. So I think that most of the pinpoints that points Jaime and also the Gould in the chat, and our responsibility to creating new technologies is key in this moment. So we need to create, for example, as we do a video identity platform to protect Zoom callings from Zoom bombing and to help companies to authenticate continuously during all the call that Ludovic is Ludovic and else is else during the call. At the same time that we give the ability also to gain those COVID relief from your coach at home. So, but at the same time, we need to work together in the regulations. We need to work together in all the adjustments, because the last year was the, I always talk about that, was the most similar to live during a cybersecurity breach all the year. Because all the time we was making some type of, well, okay, do that, but only this time, just because the pandemic, right? So everything that we are doing in most of the cases, we are doing patches to help the citizen do some kind of service or take some time of action online. So I think that 2021 will be the year to put that everything, as Jaime mentioned, in production, but taking care about the accountability and traceability about the identity of the citizen. So, and the only way that I think that we can accomplish that is working together, government, companies, private companies, and all the associations like Privacy and Rules that are working together to have a better protected identity and operations online. So that is our point of view from more than 30 countries in Latin America and part of Europe. So thank you again for this participation here.
Thank you very much for that, that industry insight and the emphasis that you gave to a very important concept, which is our digital identity online, indeed. I would now like to give the word to Mr. Brunoni, who will focus more on the monitoring and analysis of cyber-operated economic and also social crimes. Mr. Brunoni, if you please.
So, hi. First of all, thank you so much, Privacy Rule, for inviting me. I am here on behalf of ILCE, which is a Swiss-based institute focusing on the fight against economic crime. And we are right now leading a study about how the pandemic here in Switzerland is impacting economic crime and cybercrime phenomenon. So our study is actually not only about cybercrime, but I will limit my intervention today and I will speak more of the cybercrime part. So today I would like to take these few minutes to sort of explain, first of all, a few things that we have noticed that are interesting, and there is also a little bit of overlap with some of the remarks that I have just heard from the other panelists, which I do not think is a bad thing. Actually, it's quite comforting thing. And then I will also list a few things that we are doing to try to be active in this complicated period and to contribute to combating this phenomenon. So first of all, with regard to cybercrime, we have noticed that a lot of the, let's say, examples that we see out there are not new, but the criminals are very smart in taking the overall atmosphere that is created by the pandemic and some topics that are created by the pandemic and using them to achieve their goals. So for example, I have seen, for example, a phishing email that came from a fake Netflix address that mentioned, okay, well, since we are all stuck at home, Netflix would like to offer you a free membership of 2 weeks, all right? So this is the basic idea for phishing, but again, it is making use of the current feelings of the population. Another thing that we have noticed in this context is, for example, that the Swiss government has promised at a certain point during the first part of the pandemic some financial aids that people could apply for, and so we have seen loads of fake emails, but also SMS, so smart messages, and that told people, okay, if you want to apply for these grants, you should click this link. So again, under the hood, nothing is new, but there is a new phase, and that phase was sadly pretty effective, as we have seen. So this information, we have gathered them in two ways. One is to be in contact with the police authorities in Switzerland that have told us about some of these phenomena, and the other thing that we have done. So again, during the first phase of the pandemic, our institute has created a website. So a website called coronafraud.ch. So this is the Swiss address. And this is an address in which we have asked, the population to inform us if they were aware of any suspicious website or email that was circulating, so that they could inform us. So that achieved a couple of objectives. The first one is for us to gather information, because one of the main goals of our project is to really take a picture of how economic crime has evolved and what was the behavior during the pandemic. And the second objective was that people had a way to be heard without necessarily communicating to the police, because maybe they didn't feel the need to. Of course, when we recognized a need to inform the police, we suggested to them that the best way to go about it was then to also inform the police. So, and this was very important for us, because the website not only had a success in terms of the information that we were able to gather, but it was also very well reported in the media. So that was a way for us. We noticed that by speaking about the website, people were also aware that there was a sort of higher threat that they needed maybe to consider in their private lives. And so this leads me to the next part of my brief intervention, which is about what we as academics feel that we can do during this period to contribute. Yeah. So
a bit aware of the time. Is it something that you can quickly wrap up in a minute?
Sure. So one thing that we have done is to be in contact with police authorities and share information. And the other thing is that we have actively contacted the press, because the press is very hungry for information, and the only way they usually get it is from the police, which is a good source of information, but we also can be a good source of information. And we have noticed that if we take an active stance, the press will actually be very receptive. And so this allows us to inform the population and, sensibilize the population about the issue. Thank you so much. And I will be available for questions later on.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad that you also raised this issue of raising awareness about all these cybercrime issues during the pandemic, indirectly or directly. But it's good to bring that message home. We've had a law enforcement perspective, we've had a academic and industry perspective focused on cybersecurity and cybercrime, and now I would, for the last bit of the presentations, I would like to first give the word to Dr. Tirelli, who from the law firm Penalex, which is also an exclusive member of PrivacyRules from Switzerland, who will give us a legal practitioner's perspective on these matters. Mr. Tirelli, if you please.
Thank you very much, Ruben. I'm Ludwig Tirelli from Switzerland. I see the snow behind you. We have the same snow here in Switzerland.
It is your snow, actually.
It's my snow.
It's Swiss snow.
So give me back my data of snow, please. Okay, this is kind of a problem we're experiencing. What I want to talk to you about today is that we heard the position of the academics. We heard the position of the law enforcement. We heard the position of the companies and of the compliance. I am in everyday life in contact with people, simple people. And I want to share with you the position of those people who have been told at the beginning of the pandemic, stay home, stay safe. And it's kind of provocative, but what I want to tell you is, was really staying home, staying safe, maybe from the virus, but this fully staying at home has generated a new population of victims for cybercrime. And as some of you have explained, cybercrime has always existed, even before the COVID. What happened with the COVID is that we cut off all the social contacts between people. You know, we are sociable animals. We need to have contact with each other. Before we went to work, we took the bus to go to work. We went working. Then at noon we had a lunch in a restaurant. Then I went to supermarkets to buy some food. Then I met maybe a girlfriend or something, and I came back home and so on. With COVID, I stayed at home. I worked from home with the information technologies. With COVID, I make my shopping with information technologies. With COVID, if I wanted to find the love, I found it with the information technologies. With COVID, when I have to pay my bills, I do it with the information technologies. And all these people have at one point have been confronted to these information technologies to run their everyday life, okay? And those people are not familiar with the information technologies, and they're perfect victims for cybercrime. So the same old cyber type of crimes were committed, but with a huge amount of new opportunities for the criminals, which are new people who are not experienced to deal with these crimes. So we have seen people being defrauded by those same kind of emails we professionals know and never get defrauded from this, but standard people are getting defrauded by this. We've seen people being victims of sextortion. We've seen people being victims by defamation, and so on, and so on, and so on. And what I feel from these people when they come to see us, because they've been victims of one kind of another of cybercrime, is the frustration, because maybe thanks to COVID, we're putting the finger on one big problem, which is that the prosecution of cybercrimes is not that good. Okay, we all know the high-profile cases. You know, when an hospital is being hacked and nothing is working. Those are big cases. For those big cases, the law enforcement will be putting high means, a lot of people, good international cooperation, it might be working. But most of the victims of cybercrimes are small people. And these small people, when they go to the police and say, I've been victim of a fraud of, let's say, 100 euro, the police will say, at least it's how it's working in my country, in Switzerland, no? The police will say, we cannot do nothing for you, dear sir. It will be too difficult to find offenders, and so on and so on. And what I see is this frustration, and maybe thanks to this frustration, the real problem of prosecuting cybercrime will appear, and maybe we will be evolving in this kind of cooperation, because small people also deserve justice. Small people also deserve cyber justice. And this is a point I will be glad to discuss with some of the other panelists we have here. So I give you the floor back. Thank you, Ruben.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tilele, and for that insight from the normal people's perspective, really, because they indeed should have a voice as well. For our last speaker, I would invite Mr. Manriquez Rosales to the floor, whose firm is also an exclusive member of PrivacyRules, but from Chile, and who will also give us his insights as a practitioner on this exciting topic. Mr. Manriquez, if you please.
Many thanks, Ruben, and good evening, everyone. Really, we are facing in this moment big challenges in cybercriminality. In my perspective, during this year, in a specific under the threat of coronavirus crisis, the cybercriminality not had a better position to evolve. The precedent prestigious speakers are describing very well, I think, the details related with from different angles. But we have to handle, in my perspective, in addition, other topics in 3 levels. One level, or first level, is a global perspective, considering include the massive cyber attacks with the political, economic, and social effects under the Rome Statute, like a crime of aggression. In example, the blackmailing campaigns or hacker attacks to capture the health public sector or government structures to cause horror for request a huge sum of money to rescue the sensible data already managed. In the second level, I think we have to consider domestic legislations must to adapt the norms to Budapest Convention and protocols for an effective international or regional international cooperation and assistance as Europol, Interpol, or in my country, the PDA, Police of Investigaciones in Chile, are becoming suggesting during the time. Sorry. In the third level, we need, Ruben, to consider and we need specialist prosecutors, like Dr. Turelli is saying, working with new techniques and digital skills, whom know better the rules inside the digital fire camp. To the first level described, please attend to Kampala conference in 2010 in connection with Article A, base 1 of the Rome Statute, from the page 18 in the Resolution 6, Annex 1, amendments to the Rome Statute from June 11, 2010. Same United Nations General Assembly Resolutions 3314. I said it in the African Bars Congress in 2020. In Chile, we are waiting for the approval of Budapest Convention and protocols in our Senate during this year, we hope. In summary, women, and I think the globe need really normative regulation with enforcement around the world to prevent, manage, and build efficient, integrated solutions. Because if the scientific advantage don't stop, it's really, that's very true, the cybercriminality don't sleep. Many thanks.
Thank you very much on that very useful intervention as well, emphasizing the role that the legislators nationally and internationally have to play in ensuring that law enforcement and others have the necessary tools to act effectively against those cyber crimes. Now, we've had all these very interesting interventions of all our esteemed panelists today, and if I may wrap it up, we've heard quite a few themes that are recurring, right? We've heard very clearly that the pandemic has not necessarily created many new crimes, but has rather exacerbated or emphasized existing crimes and made them more tailored to the specific pandemic situation without being actually new. And what the pandemic also did in terms of fighting those existing types, but now stronger emphasized types of cybercrime, it has exacerbated the issues that we already had in terms of international cooperation, being able to fight cybercrime at a local level, because both are relevant. So we heard that message very clearly. The idea of having effective rules to fight cybercrime, but at the same time being aware as stakeholders, as organizations, that compliance in and of itself with rules will never be enough, was another message that was clearly heard, though nothing new in light of the pandemic still has underscored the importance of having security as a main goal. And then we also heard the importance of protecting our digital identities online. Many speakers have emphasized the pandemic has forced us all to be online creatures. Even people that were not initially very digitally educated or minded, they are suddenly forced to become digital creatures and participate in the virtual world, which makes it all the more important to protect the identities that they have for themselves in that online environment, because more and more processes and day-to-day interactions are all forced in the online world. So that again touches upon the topic that several speakers have highlighted, that idea of educating people on how to deal with these new technologies, closing that knowledge gap between our youngsters and other people, older people who are perhaps not yet so well versed in the digital realm, while at the same time recognizing that our youngsters are some of the prime targets in those cybercrimes that the pandemic has brought to the fore. We also heard how that awareness can be created by having academia support the media and the public in getting knowledge about all these issues. And as Mr. Tirelli has emphasized, I believe it's important to give those people a role, to hear them, to hear the public, not only raise awareness, which is important, but at the same time, ensure that everybody receives the attention that they deserve, including having effective enforcement against perpetrators that focus on those individuals that themselves may not be large organizations. And to do all that, that's what the last speaker indicated, we need effective legislation that allows law enforcement agencies not only act effectively nationally, but also at an international scale. Give law enforcement agencies and stakeholders the tools to move quickly across borders, because that's what the criminals do as well. I think that sort of wraps up what we have been discussing during the different presentations of all our esteemed speakers. Now we come to our debate part, which I hope can be very interactive. I've seen that there have been quite a few questions in the chat as well. So perhaps to keep things lively, let's start with the questions that I've seen popping up in the chat from the audience. And I'm going to read them, and then perhaps we can see who among the panelists is willing to tackle one of those questions, right? So I see that someone has asked, well, all those crimes are not new and they happen globally. What would be your views on the priority to focus on effective and quick measures? Should the response to digital crimes be driven by the law, the technology, police enforcement, prevention, training and awareness? Who amongst the speakers wants to dive into this first question? Anyone willing? Oh, I see Mr. Brunoni, you are raising your hand.
Yeah, just I will not give a complete answer, but maybe a small remark that times of crisis, sometimes there are also opportunities to share information and to raise awareness, because we found that the population is actually receptive to everything that is linked with the pandemic. And so if we talk about phishing in general, they may, in a normal setting, they may not be that receptive, but if we speak about it in connection with the pandemic and maybe give a couple of clear examples, we have an opportunity there. And also we have a press that is very sensible to these topics and that also is available to allows us more space to share this information. So yes, there is also an opportunity for raising awareness and sensibilization.
Thank you very much. Anyone else who wants to add to this, to the intervention? No one? Then perhaps we can move on to the next question. I saw that, and that's perhaps a question for Professor de Busser. Someone asked, why not having a security-based label for privacy by design? You mentioned that idea of security integrated and ingrained in the culture of an organization. Why not have a label for that? Like we have the eco label. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, it's actually something that we have been thinking of. In fact, one of my students did a project on that a couple of years ago by using the traffic light protocol and you know, the energy labels that you see on fridges and all sorts of appliances. This also goes back to what Ludovic was saying with the normal people need to be educated. Well, you need to make it easy for people to understand which of the two products that I'm looking at in the store is the more secure one. And if you give them a big data protection policy or privacy policy and all sorts of technical and legal speak, there are a lot of lawyers on the call, so you will know what I mean by that. You don't make it easy enough for people to make that choice, and you don't make it easy enough for customers to, you know, vote with their money, so to speak, and go for the company that actually offers the more secure and more protective either software or hardware. So I think indeed a variant to the energy label with red, orange, green, or whatever you want in between, that makes it easy for customers to understand, I'm going for this phone and not for that phone because this phone has better security, has better data protection, better privacy functions. That I think would be one of the most practical and most feasible ways to educate customers, make it easy for them. But
yeah.
of course, we need the industry to be on board, and we need the industry to do this and to step into this engagement of this label. What I was speaking of cybersecurity by integrated design, that is something that it really requires a multidisciplinary approach. It requires human behavior experts working together with experts in technology, legal experts, as well as experts in organizational studies to make this happen, to literally build in more cybersecurity options from the ground up.
Yeah. Do you think that in such a labeling exercise, one of the parameters that one could take into account is also the ability and the willingness of industry stakeholders to collaborate with law enforcement on these topics, the way that they take their social responsibility, their role in combating the phenomenon?
Yes, but you have to also, it's kind of the debate between cybercrime and cybersecurity. So,
yeah.
So you want the industry to take a step prior to that and go really into how can we proactively make sure that incidents don't happen, that products are safe. And of course, you have several interests here at play, because industry likes to make appliances that don't last forever and that have to be replaced after a couple of years. And then you need to convince them to build it as secure as possible. But if customers will follow, and if customers will actually do that mind shift and go for the more secure products, you will automatically see the market respond to that.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Thank you very much for that.
Can I quickly add to that one, Ruben?
Yeah.
Just very briefly, I completely agree with what Else was saying, and I think it's something we've talked about with the World Economic Forum, for example, to try and push this idea of security by design. And I think there is a lot of dialogue between private sector and law enforcement these days, but a lot of it tends to be about the corporate security. So it tends to be about sharing threat information when the corporation is the target rather than when the customer is the target. I think the uphill struggle in security by design is that the race to market in tech is absolutely brutal, and that companies are in a huge hurry to get their products out. And then the modern approach is that you get it on the market and then you do incremental releases to tidy up the issues with it once it's already on the market, because they want to be first. So the security by design kind of runs a little bit against that. And it's a little bit about incentives as well. I mean, if you look at banking, for example, banks have been quite progressive in coming up with all kinds of new ways to secure their customers' accounts. But a lot of that is because actually the banks were the ones who would suffer the loss if there was a fraud on the customer. And I think in other areas of technology, it tends to be the customer who's the victim rather than the corporation. So there's a less incentive there. So I think it's also a little bit for consumers to express that expectation when they're shopping as well. I think if the smart TV example, if customers are actually asking about these kind of things, then companies will respond to it very quickly. As long as companies don't have the impression that consumers are particularly interested in this, then I'm afraid the incentive might not be there. So I don't think this is so much something that law enforcement can solve. I think it's something that companies have to look at, and also consumers.
If I can interject here, I would stimulate also Sebastian's perspective, because I believe that it's Else also was referring to the industry. So I think it would be interesting to hear. There's an immense circulation of information, especially when a new threat emerges. I know, Sebastian, that you all are connected immediately all around the world, and you learn about it and you discuss on how to face a new threat. So for what concerns, a possible cybersecurity label, as Else was proposing, I mean, how are you addressing this? Sorry, Ruben, for interjecting.
No problem.
Yeah, No, thank you again. What I think is, first of all, I think that companies should be protected by law at the same time that they need to comply with the law in all the terms. So, and in this moment that the identity of the user is so weak, we need to create regulations to help to protect the citizens' digital assets. From our point of view, there is a lot of interest about the awareness and how we can help citizens. But it's important to know that most of the companies, actually banks, has been mentioned, has a lot of the regulations in SOC 2, SOX, PCI for all e-commerce. So there is a lot of different kind of regulations, laws, and best practices that these companies should comply. This is for the common user, not the legal or the technical. So you are protected. You can buy online without the hassle of being robbed all the time. And at the company, what we think is that we need to move to a more citizen-based protection. What that means, the behavior of Ben, my behavior, Ruben, or Luca, it's different. And we have the information without begging and breaking the privacy of the individual to help with that information to protect them. So it's about using the right technology. It sounds simple, that is not. Using the right technology to protect in more an intelligent way. Not with the AI. Everything today has AI. It's not about AI. It's about using the right components to protect the user. That's my point of view.
Thank you very much. And going further on that, perhaps a question for Mr. Ansieta Antivilo. I think you said in your intervention, we have that knowledge gap that we have amongst our citizens, where people are not really aware of what they have to do to act in a mature way when they are online. Are there perhaps any initiatives that the Chilean police is doing in improving that awareness amongst the public?
Yeah, well, I was gonna say something else on top of what it was already said by
you can go ahead.
By Mrs. Debuze and all the others, Sebastian.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's always it is quite tricky, you know, when we really want on one side, you know, as a citizen, I would love to make sure that I secure my information from people that I don't need them to be aware of what I'm doing. But on the other side, see, we need information just to ensure, you know, when we're running a criminal investigation, we need to ensure that we can exchange information. So actually we can really get as close as we can to the criminals. So the break-even point for that is quite tricky, always. So the more information we gather in a way, I don't know, a national level because of security whatsoever, it would imply, you know, we're giving away part of who I am, what I do, whatsoever. So anonymity on one side, which is good. Sometimes it's good until we need, in a way, to pass over, you know, that anonymity. So finding the trade-off for that, I would say, is something that we still need to work on. It's a matter of, doesn't matter what people do. If you're not trespassing, you know, any criminal law, it will be okay if you're not trespassing something. Because after you go over the edge, it will be something that you would lose, you know, you will be, or someone will have access to that information. It's something later on for many people to discuss, talk. We have academia, we have some philosophical backgrounds on that, but it is quite tricky. And again, going back to the question is what we are doing. I think let's put as an example, whenever you, somebody wants to open a bank account in any country. I don't know in how many countries actually somebody that goes over there, you know, put their fingerprint, you know, on paper whatsoever, whether that information is being crossed against, you know, police forces just to ensure that that person is who he says he is. See? Because later on, if we open bank accounts, let's say, I'm using that only as an example. If someone opens a bank account without being who he is, so we're talking about identity theft, right? Later on, this is a commercial thing. So the government, public sector shouldn't be involved, shouldn't get involved in a commercial transaction. But if at the beginning of the process is already, a criminal activity, we can say later on, if we don't do that, on this side of the fence, if we don't do anything just to ensure that it will be something that is not phony, dodgy, having the means, to ensure that the person who is opening the bank account, it is who he says he is. And if he is not, we should get information, because potentially, we know that that bank account only will create some trouble. Say we will have, police forces, investigating not one case, it will be maybe 25 cases, per day, until, someone finds out that it was in a way just heating up, as we call, that bank account. So we have 25 days. The person has 25 days until somebody, the guy being the victim of the identity theft, will receive maybe, or a month and a half later, will receive some requests, from prosecutor's office saying, okay, you come here because you have a debt, what you've been doing. So I never opened a bank account, but that happens with opening, cell phones accounts and everything. So the problem is, what do we do? What are we doing in any country? And I would like to see if anybody, here attending this webinar, if anybody in any country is aware that to open a bank account, as an example, the process is being cleared as well as one of the many people involved or entities involved by the police, just to ensure that nothing will happen later. And I think that it's not. And again, this is about creating trust, building trust, in the entities that we have in different countries. And that doesn't go against, people's, because I'm not trying to detect or getting into the transactions within the bank account. I'm just saying that to make sure that the process it will be clean at the end of the road, it has to be clean at the beginning when we started, actually doing the whole process. So that's just an example to make sure that, we're now working all together at national level. So what are the hopes that we have then to make sure that at international level, we can go any faster than national or domestic, procedures. So again, I insist the problem is quite big, because we need to build trust first among, national or domestic procedures, just to start building up something that at international level. And I think the challenge is huge, and it's only getting greater. And all this kind of advantage is only on the side of organized crime.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
So I don't want to be pessimistic. I'm just trying to be realistic. Sorry for that.
No. Those are very valid points you raise. What we've been seeing in our own practice as well is that many, especially companies, when they are faced with cybercrime during the pandemic, they are very, very hesitant to involve law enforcement, because most of them have the perception that even if we involve them, the results will be nil. We'll get a lot of big administrative overhead, because we'll need to comply with orders and all that sort of thing. But in the end, the results will be fairly limited, because internationally, they're not able to collaborate very quickly. And typically, cybercrime is cross-border. That's the perception that we often get from these companies. And many of you have raised it. I mean, we need that collaboration and that trust nationally, but at the same time, for cybercrime, you need to scale internationally. It needs to become international, and you need that effective international cooperation. And perhaps for Mr. Veli, Açar, a question. Do you think, or have you seen any indications that the pandemic itself has sort of acted as a catalyst to improve that international cooperation? Have you seen any indications that indeed legislators, regulators, and law enforcement now in the face of a tidal wave of cybercrime are inclined to collaborate more effectively, or look for ways to collaborate more effectively?
Actually, now there are some channels we already have been using for years. For example, we have been good relationships with Facebook, and it didn't get better. It has always been good. So I cannot safely say that because of the pandemic, some private companies stepped up their game. For example, I'm gonna name and shame. Sorry about that, but for example, Twitter. Unless a case is not urgent, we haven't gotten positive responses from Twitter too much, especially for fraud cases, for example. So I cannot say that's the case.
Okay, and you're really yeah, sure.
Can I react on that one, Ruben?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think there's a problem in terms of the channels for international cooperation. I think the channels are there and they're quite well established now. I think the problems are thinking about the companies that you referred to who maybe don't see the added value of reporting themselves as victims. I think the first thing is attribution of cybercrime. So in order to set up international cooperation on a cybercrime case, you have to know which jurisdiction you need to work with. And in a lot of cases, it's difficult, if not impossible, to actually establish the attribution of the source of the cyber attack. So that's a massive obstacle. And then the other challenge at the local policing level, which I think our colleague from the UK, Andrew, mentioned earlier, is the volume. So the volume of criminality at the local level, where maybe local law enforcement bodies are not equipped to cope. I mean, even in the area of child sexual abuse, which I mentioned earlier, the online distribution of child sexual abuse materials, which is a priority for every police force for obvious reasons and for every politician. You know, even in that field, the volume of material which is reported to law enforcement from NGOs such as NECMEC and others is so vast that there's a whole triage process to actually prioritize this. So even in that crime area, it's not possible to follow up on every single lead. So you can imagine that for something like, you know, fraud, the problem is even greater. So I don't think the problem is in the jurisdictional, or let's say the judicial cooperation channels. It's more about the attribution itself. But I do acknowledge, just since our colleague from Turkey mentioned the cooperation with the Silicon Valley companies, it's also an issue that the country where the, let's say the online service provider, which has its legal obligation in one country, won't necessarily be the country where the crime has occurred. So it's also challenging if you have to go via a procedure in a country which isn't actually affected by the crime, and how much of a priority will it be for that country's legal authorities to process a case that took place on the other side of the world. And that's the whole mutual legal assistance issue, which is also something that needs to be looked at. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention. Now, if the panelists allow me, I would like to go back quickly to a few of the questions that we are getting from the public in the chat, in the Q&A. Perhaps another question that might be interesting is the one that reads, from some perspective, and I just quote, from some perspective, the pandemic has also forced us to talk about many security issues that would otherwise never reach the news. For example, the contact tracing apps and the related privacy issues have been greatly debated in Italy. Can you think of any benefit that the pandemic has brought up in cybersecurity? Anyone that wishes to react to that? So the effect that the pandemic has had on, yeah, Mr. Stranieri, go ahead.
Ruben, well, I think that awareness is the question is the answer, right? Because this stage put us in the spotlight. So now talking about cybersecurity is not about experts. You can talk with your grandmother, your father, and your kids about the threats, right? Because also the technology becomes part of our home. So now you need to know that this door should be closed during this hour and a half. So all the family knows that they cannot come in. So at the same time, bringing school to home, it's also an awareness for teachers, for other kind of personnel that was not usually connected with all this digital life. So I think that awareness is the main advantage from this stage.
Thank you very much. Any other reactions to that statement? No, then perhaps another question that we have gotten from the audience. It relates back to the question that we had on the involvement of the ISPs. Someone asked whether the internet service providers, when they provide information, whether they're reliable partners or not. Anyone wants to react to that? Any response? I see that someone has raised their hand. It's Mr. Veli Açar, go ahead.
Ruben, is the question about the reliability of the information, or?
I presume, yes, that's what I presume. How reliable can you count on the cooperation with ISPs and what they provide to you?
Let's say 99.99% of the cases, it's reliable. I've never seen a case in which we went to the suspect's home or office, for example, and we couldn't find the discriminating evidence in his or her digital belongings. So it's near 100%.
All right, thank you very much. Perhaps a last question, because I'm well aware of the time. A question from the audience that reads: how do we analyze the cybercrime in these times when there is a big shortage of professionals in the field, and with organizations that are not ready to implement serious measures? Sorry, it skips. That are not ready to implement serious measures for securing their own networks, as they are only coping with this new era working from home? Thanks. So I guess the question here is, how do we cover the fact that we have that resources problem? I presume we will have the interplay with the private sector and private security professionals that can help in this regard, who help solving cybersecurity incidents when they arrive. And at the same time, what Mr. Gould said during his presentation, that involvement of local police units and that local approach to combating cybercrime. Any other reactions to that statement? Yes.
Sorry, Ruben, if I may jump in. I don't think there's like one kind of a solution, one size that will fit all in a way, kind of a approach. I think that, as I said previously, just to reduce the gap, we need definitely to work with private sector. We definitely need to work as law enforcement with academia. That will be that will ensure, reducing, the gaps that we find in the process. But again, that will never be enough if we don't find, the assistance, the help of community. We need, as law enforcement, we need people getting into what's happening inside of their homes, learning about what it could happen, potential victims, it can be their families. We need to secure, as the whole, as society, from a societal point of view, we need to ensure that we're all working together. Up to now, I don't see that, we are all working kind of isolated one from another. And when something happens, that particular person, he wants them all. He wants all the answers, all the solutions. But we need to work, and seriously, it might sound like a nice song, but I'm not singing. I don't even sing. I'm just saying this is what I see on a daily basis. And if we are not working in a more coordinated fashion than organized crime, someone here has the lead, and someone here is the big fish, and it seems like unless we move faster than them, it is not us. See? So I would say we need to make sure that we all work together. We need to change the way we've been doing business from this end in general. And in the summary that I sent over there is, we can make the analogy with what has happened, with drugs over the last 60 years. For 60 years worldwide, we've been fighting drugs. And my question to the audience, to the panelists, is who thinks that actually now we're in a better fashion, better position than 60 years ago? We're not. So if I go to the doctor, let's say, I've been visiting the same doctor for a year, and actually he has prescribed, some medicines, and I've taken everything. And a year after, I'm not getting any better. What should I do? Well, everybody will say, change the doctor, right? Yeah, right. One thing. But the second aspect will be change maybe the procedure that you've been following for a year, because it doesn't work, even if it comes from another doctor. Just making the analogy, what I'm trying to say is for 60 years, we've been doing business in one way. In drugs, when we see about drugs, maybe we've been tackling, producers, unless, I insist, I come from a school of economics. So unless we tackle, let's not tackle only supply, we have to tackle demand in that aspect. If we tackle demand and demand goes to zero, when it gets into drugs consumption, trafficking will go to zero. No demand, no supply. So in this aspect, we need to learn from the process. I think worldwide, maybe, we've been focusing in the wrong leg of the problem. So we need to be aware now that we have to change, the way we'll be tackling, because this is something new in a way. But let's not wait 70 years until we find, a new approach for it. We don't have the time. Too many victims will go down the road. So we need to change the way to do business. And I think this is even more challenging because it is not only a legal issue. It is something about procedures that we're not facing in the proper way.
I think I take it from here. First, thanking very much, Ruben, for this very dynamic moderation. I really appreciate. We really appreciate that. And without having the time to mention each of the speakers, personally, I really want to warmly thank all of you. I think I take it ideally from Jaime, who in the beginning of his presentation was saying that we need to build a trust as a key element between the public and the private sector. Which is actually one of the scopes and the missions, if you want, of privacy rules, organizing these kind of debates when everyone is represented, the academic, the cybersecurity industry, law enforcement, international institutions, and speak about the problems. We cannot come to these roundtables pretending that at the very end it will be a solution. We would be dreamers, but the very fact that we are aware of the problems and we disseminate information about the problems, it's an important step forward, I believe, to build that trust, to allow to be more organized, again, as Jaime was saying, more organized at the cybercrime or the organized crime that profits from cybercrime. It's something that was mentioned by Kemal and others at the Budapest Convention, so the Council of Europe and the Cybercrime Convention of 2001. Actually, at Privacy Rules, we are working in order to organize a seminar, an e-seminar for obvious reasons related to the pandemic, on whether the substantial part of the law is sufficient, and whether, from the procedural perspective, there is anything to be changed. Kemal himself said that the protocol number 2 is insufficient. Juan Carlos was saying that probably we need to look further at the international criminal law in the broader sense, and so on and so forth. So we will be working on that, as we appreciate working with EU security and ELCE, who is so much closely connected with cyber industry for future events. We were speaking with Luke about possibly diving into a specific kind of cybercrime of nowadays, which is the cybercrimes through romance app. Yesterday, there was the news of a massive cyber attack with possible 10 million euros fine against one of these apps, which has been breached. This is to say that actually Privacy Rules is very pleased to allow all of us informing our communities, our work environment, our networks to speak about these problems, and each of us presenting own solutions and get to know each other to build that trust that pretty much every one of you has advocated for. As a last note, it's fundamental to disseminate information, I believe, in the outset to close the gap and possibly to eliminate the demand to some extent that Jaime again was mentioning now. Probably we should start speaking with the kids at school, at the elementary level. Yesterday I was speaking with my cousin, 8-year-old child, who has an 8-year-old child, and was saying, I'm sending him to an informatics course. I wish that actually part of the course would be dedicated to the dangers of computers and mobile phones, and not necessarily how to use them. but actually starting to say, look, you are exposing your family by the simple fact you take a picture, that's an immense threat. And then possibly teach them how to use these devices. So maybe this is also something that all together we should look at in order to build the cybersecurity of tomorrow, at least. Once more, thank you very much, each and every of you. The cyber threat from my side is that we will definitely invite all of you again to be speakers in our events, because we have witnessed from the public a lot of interest in this. So I hope that this is just a farewell. And once more to Ruben in particular for your moderation. We are very close to all communities for what they are suffering for the pandemic, and hopefully one day soon we will meet in person, discuss about these topics, also with the possibility of enjoying a cup of something together. Once more, on behalf of Privacy Rules, thank you very much again.